All right, Charlie, we've got a great show today. We're going to be talking about bulls, bears, and ballots. And what I mean by that is what's going to happen with the market as this election is going to take place this year in 2024 comes up a lot. And what's going to happen? You know, is market going to go up? Is market going to go down? What happens if Biden stays in office? What happens if Trump gets reelected, if he's the one that's going to get reelected? What's going to happen to the market? So before we jump in, let me ask you a question. I did a bunch of research, lots of stuff that we're going to go over today on the last 6 elections. And of the last 6 elections, I looked at what happened the year of the election and what happened the year after the election. So we got 12 of those years. So if we're looking past 6 elections, there's 12 market years. And I wanted to see how many of those years were positive versus how many of those years are negative. So we had some crazy markets. You know, we had 2000s, 2008. We had some election year craziness. It hasn't been a clean ride since 2000 to now. How many of those years do you think were positive, and how many of those years do you think were negative?
I bet it's pretty even.
Pretty even?
Possibly even more up than not, just because the market tends to go up. I don't think elections necessarily in the long run have a huge impact, except leading up to it, the volatility, the
volatility and
the emotions of just the progress is going to.
There can definitely be some policy effects to the market, right? So if a new administration was going to get into that there's definitely things that the government can do to affect our market.
Oh yeah.
Positive and negative. When I did this, I had the exact same answer to you. I was like, I bet you it's going to be 50-50. I was shocked to see that only 3
were down.
Only 3 years were down. 2 of those were pretty simple, 2000 and 2008.
Right. Market was already reeling.
Market was already getting crushed right after the bubble burst, and then we had the real estate debacle. And the rest, 9, were positive. So it's almost like you hear this information, you're like, oh, it's good. 80% of the time or whatever the number is, it should be positive. I'm not so sure this will be
Well, we always say past performance doesn't guarantee future.
I am a little bit more pessimistic on the market right now, than I am optimistic. Mm-hmm. But let's jump into here. So let's look at market trends during new presidential election versus incumbent election. Mm-hmm. So right now we have the possibility of an incumbent. Biden could be reelected, as opposed to like when Obama was done after his second term, he can't get reelected. So we know there's going to be a new president.
Right.
I want to talk about that, but let's first jump into this. What happens to the market historically when we have an incumbent that can get reelected? What happens, or what could happen, or what has happened?
I would say if the incumbent does get reelected, people must be thinking that their economic situation is pretty good. But that's a lot of it's emotion, I think. Mm-hmm. One way or the other.
Well, I think when it comes to an incumbent getting reelected, you have 4 years of data, which is a little skewed because the prior president puts in policies that sometimes don't see the effects of that until 4 or 6 years later. So a little bit of this data is hard to fully understand because it takes time to flush things out.
And I think it has to do with what's going on in the outside realm out there, like quantitative easing, transcended a presidency. And so that looks bad for the Republican and then great for the Democrat, just depending on when it happens.
Correct. So we have now seen 3+ years of Biden policy. We've seen the effects on the economy wherever you're at. And we're trying to not be political in this podcast, but at the end of the day, we know what we're getting with Biden. Statistically, if you look at the historical data, no matter who the president is that can be reelected, what we do see is a tendency of continued policy and continued market movement. So the market actually has been okay. However, we're starting to see a slow of market, which could be related to some of the policies that have been passed and put into play, which might start to ratchet back some of the growth that we've seen. Because in the 3 full years, we saw, the pandemic year was crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year was pretty good, and then the year after that was 22 was bad.
That's when the big tech companies took a
Exploded.
beating.
Yeah.
Then
And then last year was
they came back.
they came all back, and then this year it's not over. We're just in the
We
first
just don't. Well,
first
the bulk of the stock market's pretty
flat.
flat. It's
Actually,
the
even last
Magnificent
year,
Seven or Five or whatever we're calling the big ones again now.
correct. I mean, if we look at last year, the bulk of the market was about 7% up,
Mm-hmm.
but the markets themselves were up huge. But it was such a small part of the big companies
Yeah.
that really dragged the whole index up. This year, the market's pretty much flat, as opposed to even smaller segment of the market that's pulling it up. And that's where in today's world, our market indices are hard to judge because they're so weighted top heavy to such a small section of the market, which isn't reality.
Yeah.
So some of the observations that we've seen in years past is there's going to be volatility in a re-election year.
Oh yeah, there's so much rhetoric back and forth, and of course, I'm conspiracy theorist. I don't know that big money is going to drive a lot of the volatility because I think that's how they make money.
Mm-hmm.
Just when the money changes hands, the stocks change hands.
Yeah, I mean, there's some economic context around this as well. The job data from last year, there's been plenty of research that's come out that was way overinflated by, I believe it was 1.1 million jobs that they stated that were created, jobs created last year. Of the total jobs that were created, 1.1 million of those jobs actually never did see the light of day.
Yeah.
Actually, it might have been more than that because I think it was over 100,000 jobs a month. So it was probably closer to 1.2 or over. And then we saw a lot of jobs lost in January of this year.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of jobs going to the wayside. And so I don't know if that's really reflected in the numbers or not.
They're not. So job numbers created are literally jobs numbers created, but they don't subtract jobs that are lost. So it's very difficult to look at this data and go, hey, what's good, what's bad? Because yes, there are new jobs created every month, but there are a lot of jobs lost. And if you look at the jobs lost in January of this year, we lost so many that you have to go all the way back to 2009 and how bad was the economy in 2009, where you saw that many people laid off in a January. So we're seeing potential cracks in our economy and in our market that could be in store for a really interesting election year this year. Okay, so let's. I think we're going to move on to if Trump gets elected, what could we see going into next year?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of changes in policy. In Washington. Well, when Biden came in, he kind of shut down a lot of the fossil fuel industry, shut down a pipeline, which Trump was very pro-energy to make America energy efficient. And I don't think Trump would subsidize all of the electric vehicle push that we're doing right now. I mean, it's just a difference and that's why I say sectors can be bull or bear. Just depending on what the president's policies are.
I would say there's a stark contrast because we've already went from Trump to Biden. And Trump had his agenda. We saw the economy as he was president, whether you like him or love him. I mean, the economy was relatively good. Then we had the pandemic and things kind of blew up. And then Biden, love him or hate him, he's had his policies which were stark difference than Trump. So we know that there is a world of change that happened when Biden took over. If Trump takes back over, we know there's a world of change coming. And I would totally agree in the standpoint that we will see dramatic change in policy. We will see probably dramatic turnover in Washington. And as a result, I think we're going to see dramatic volatility.
Well, you can't help that because taking out the independents, half the country is pro-Democrat, half the country is pro-Republican.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, at this point in time, we're really butting heads. We're not as close as we used to be,
There's more
40, 50
segregation.
years
I
ago.
know, it's nuts.
Uh,
I would even say, since I've, been around, I remember early in the 80s and 90s, there was always this synergy and collective thought process in the Democratic Party. I felt like if they ever voted, they always voted the same way. And then you had the Republican Party, where you would have just people that would stick to their laurels, and you would have this segregation where you didn't know what percent of the Republican Party would vote which way. And now you're almost seeing just the opposite, where Republicans, for the most part, I think are voting in sync. They still have their outliers, but this percentage-wise, it's way less now than it was way back when. Because back then you could see 30% say, no, I'm not voting. You're crazy. Where it was always like 95% or better on the Democratic side. Now, depending on the vote, there's not really any synergies on the Democratic side, and they're fighting, and you almost see it's like what the parties are shifting, where you see this lack of alignment on the Democratic side, which has never existed before since I can remember, and maybe I don't remember politics correctly. But on the Republican side, you'd have just degrees of Republican, and there was always just 1 degree of Democrat. Now there's degrees of Democrats, just like there's degrees of Republican, and it's changing politics.
It is, and it's not necessarily a good thing.
No, we're not together on anything, and I think it's causing chaos. And I think even in America, where we're going to see a lot of volatility in the market is because we're super segregated. And if you don't believe me, then you don't like me. If you don't think the way I think, then you're against me.
Right. That's
a bad place to be.
That's too
We
extreme.
could totally disagree,
Yeah,
and still be friends and get along. And
well, that's the way it should be.
that's the way it should be. So here's going to be some of my prediction if Trump takes over.
All right.
So if Trump takes over or gets back into office, and as we're recording this, we don't even know. I would imagine he's going to be on the Republican ballot.
I would think so.
But as of right now, we don't even know. Although today's an important day, so
Today's
we'll know.
Super Tuesday,
Yeah,
so we'll see.
we'll know. So the realities behind, as we're recording this, I think if Trump gets the ballot and then becomes president, I think we're going to see massive volatility almost immediately. I don't want to be a conspiracy theory. I don't want to say the market's going to react poorly because they didn't want to elect Trump. What I am thinking is going to happen is we've got powers that be. With the way the market is set up, bad things can happen in a heartbeat. And you'll have that for whatever reason it was set up this way, you have that 2-month window when somebody else is elected, and then you have 2 months of kind of stalemate of what could take place.
What are they going to? What are they kind of ram through?
What are they going to? Yes.
What
So I personally think that 2-month period is going to be nuts this time around if he gets elected. From the standpoint, I think bad things will potentially take place, and they will 100% say, "See, America doesn't want Trump as president," and whatever the talking points are, they are. But I could see a dramatic change in the market. Last time Trump took office, they called it the Trump bump, and it went down and then just shot straight back up. I don't know if that would be the case this time, because the market is so overinflated right now. If the market doesn't see volatility until election night, or if we do see volatility but it continues its path where it's at, I think the market give up a ton.
Do you? I think that most of the expectations are already priced into the market, but the emotion and the big companies can swing fear and huge volatility regardless of who wins. Because in politics, sometimes speaking the truth isn't a requirement.
It is not a requirement.
No.
Yeah. So if Trump takes office, what do you think is going to happen?
I think it's going to have a huge impact on the illegal migration and the border. because
specifically to the market.
to the market,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a good thing
Long term,
long term.
I do too.
That's what I'm
Short
saying.
term.
Overnight or through the end of the year, I don't know. That 2 month window you were talking about, who knows what's going to happen?
I think it's going to be longer than 2 months. But I think in the next year, even if Biden stays in office, I think we're going to see a retraction of the market.
It might, we haven't had an inflation issue like we've had over the last few years in a long time.
I know.
And so that's kind of, I think, playing into what's going on.
Agreed. And so do you think there'll be any kind of retraction of the market?
Well, statistics say no. Chances are not that it'll be a good thing.
So you think the market will just continue to go up?
I'm not saying it'll go up. I don't think it'll be a huge contraction.
Oh, I hope you're right.
Because, when has the market contracted terribly? 2008, you mentioned, because of the housing issue. 2001, 2, 3, when the dot-com bubbles happened. It seems like it's when big things happen, like COVID in March 2020, the market shot down. But then for the most part, the market trickles up. We always say stocks are a good place to be to fight inflation. They can overcome the inflation.
The last time we saw in America inflation like we're seeing now was in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the nickname of the 70s? The lost decade. Because from the beginning of the 70s to the end of the 70s, the market did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was wacko in between. And if Biden stays in office, we'll probably continue to see inflation the way we are. He might change next 4 years. I have no idea. But if things continue as they are, we're probably going to see like we saw 21, 22, 23, where the market did this. Mm-hmm. And I think we will continue to see that because of the ping pong reaction of inflation and how it affects purchase power. Like Americans don't have the purchase power today that they did years ago.
Oh no.
And that's why we're seeing this reaction. And if things continue, I could see another sharp downturn and then almost immediate uptick, mm-hmm. just like that we saw in the 70s, because the policies are pretty close to the same, which is pushing this inflation. Yep. And you can blame inflation on corporations because that's the talking point of the government, but it is not the corporations.
No,
it's the government
so
drives
much
it.
Money into the economy.
Yeah, the government's driving this. Okay, so let's do, well, we kind of already stuck here, predictions of what can happen. So what has happened historically as we've seen, let's kind of jump into this again, in the past. And if we go back in time, this is what we have. 2000 was the end of Clinton. And we knew we were going to get a new Republican. We knew we were going to get a new president, but yep. It was a Republican. What had happened? Like, we didn't know we're in the end of a bubble. In that election year, I mean, you were printing money. I mean, you could invest in anything and make money.
It was just something about the price to earnings ratios of these big tech companies was 200, 300. I'm thinking, how in the world can you sustain something like that? And sure enough, it hit the fan.
Up.
Yeah.
So that first year of the president of Bush, the market retracted 9%, then it was 11% in 2001, then it was 22% mm-hmm. in 2002. So his first basically 3 years as president, I mean, it was a horrible time. First couple of years as president, we saw the market go 9, 11, and 22%, mm-hmm. and he got the blame for all of that, but he just took office.
Right.
And it was a fun run through the mid 80s and 90s where, I mean, there was a couple of volatility years in there, but mm-hmm. the reality is, I mean, the market just was a rocket ship. And that's where we saw the birth of tech. Yep. And tech ruled the world. And there wasn't this shift of where it is now, where these big companies were tech companies that could change the market on a whim. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could have NVIDIA or an Apple or a Tesla or an Amazon, a Facebook right now. They could have a huge day and move the entire market.
Oh, yeah.
Back then, you didn't really have a company that could have a huge day. I mean, you potentially, but not like now. There's never been a time in our market. Well, I take that back. GM way, 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 way back when.
They used to be the top
Used to be the
company,
top
didn't
dog.
they, in the S&P? And
Correct. That would have been the only other time in American history that I know
but
that you had a
you kind of
market.
wonder what percentage it carried. Like when you get a Nvidia or Apple or Microsoft, the trillion-dollar companies, where what 7 of them make up 20-something% of the S&P. When you
But they move
look,
almost 50% of the market.
yeah,
Or 70% of it. If you put them all together, they move. If all three of them are up like a point or 2% in a
mm-hmm.
day, the whole market's up
Yeah.
1.8%, even if the rest of them do nothing. I mean, that's insane.
That's
So in 2004, got reelected, and now we saw almost this shift of whatever policies he put in play. He was just got battered for his first 3 years, and then he started to come out, and then basically we saw a rocket ship from 2004 through his last presidency through 2008 when Obama took office, and he saw immediately a bubble burst. We had another bubble burst. And that was a bad one. That was a 37%
I mean, that was
decline.
huge.
Yeah.
It was absolutely huge.
The Lehman Brothers, I mean, everything changed. But then basically for the next 7 years, we saw a very nice continued growth run. His first year was bad. The next 3 years was good. They got reelected. Same policies. We started to see, I want to say, prior to the Obama administration, I don't feel like I don't remember race tension that much growing up.
Mm-mm.
And then somewhere in that presidency, I felt like race tension came back
It
to
changed
America.
on how it was viewed, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I know I'm white. I at the end of the day, maybe I was oblivious to it, but at the end of the day, I mean, I grew up on the other side of the tracks. I was very, very poor, and I grew up with people where sometimes I was the only white guy or white family, and I never felt tension. I was never scared.
Yeah.
I never grew up in an environment, and I grew up all over the U.S. where my color was an issue or anybody else's color was an issue. And then somewhere in there, I'm like, what color? What? Like,
Yeah.
it was weird. And I don't want to go back to specific events, but from somewhere in that time to now it's a big deal again. And, there's segregation and it's not the same America, I don't feel like.
Well, no, I think there's certain factions, organizations, agendas in America that's trying to create silos of people again.
What do divide and conquer, right?
Yeah.
And then we had, at the end of his presidency, we had just a crazy thing happen because I thought it was a foregone conclusion that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president. And I remember on election night calling one of my buddies and I was like, is Trump really going to win? Like, I didn't think he had a shot, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like we're going to have another change of the guards because I thought we were going to have 12 years of Democrat presidency. And it was, shocking. He became president. And
that was funny how it happened. I had a client call me, said, why didn't you get us out of the market? When it looked like the market was tanking because of what happened. Yeah. And then almost immediately
it
shot right back up.
It did. It
was unbelievable how fast it came up.
And then he was president. We saw nothing but just a blow up of the market. It was awesome.
Up until 2020.
Yep. And then 2020 happened and we had the pandemic. And it's interesting to see how far we've come from that pandemic and, how now the data is coming out that it wasn't necessarily a
good way we handled it all.
Yeah. And then, Biden's ushered in as he got elected. We've seen some good markets and some bad markets along the way. And then here we are.
Yeah.
And, really the trends aren't bad. When we look back at the history we just went over, I don't look at that and panic.
No.
I don't go, oh man, it's going to be bad. And I like your perspective on the market because history says it might not be that bad. And I hope you're right.
You know what does scare me? Not the election at all. If China does something with Taiwan to instigate another war or something like that, what would that do to world trade, to the United States, to just the fear it would generate?
Well, we've had this discussion before, and I want to jump into how to prepare for this election and the volatility.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens, the last election, we had a pandemic. We've talked, not trying to be conspiracy theory here, but, what's going to happen this year? Is it going to be another pandemic? Is it going to be a war? Is it going to be something to rally behind this presidency? Because right now the polls are horrible behind Biden. He's got an approval rating of 37%. Trump's leading in almost every single category. In some categories, like the economy, Trump is like way out front. So all numbers, all polls lead to Trump, winning. But at the end of the day, I could have said the same to Hillary.
With Hillary, yeah, exactly.
So we don't really know what's going to happen. The realities are it doesn't look very strong for Biden. And it's almost like he needs something, what and this is just, I'm not saying anything is going to happen, but it wouldn't hurt his cause if we had a reason to rally behind him and a reason to go, okay, he's our guy. Because right now, nobody wants to vote for any of these people, and just because of how they've demonized Trump and he can't do anything right in the media. Although there was a hilarious skit that happened on Saturday Night Live a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That was fun. I was like, wow, you didn't villainize Trump. You actually made fun of him, and it was hilarious. And they did the same to Biden. Like, it was like real comedy again. I'm like, that was a fresh breath of air where, you're like, because I feel like so many news outlets or so many TV shows have gotten so political where they make one guy good and one guy bad instead of just making
even
fun
at
of
the
them.
expense of being funny.
Yeah. Like they want to make a point for who they're supporting. I don't want to know who you support. Just make fun of them, or
It's kind of horrible in my mind how the world is putting pressure on comedians that they can't be sarcastic, they can't attack somebody or whatever, just to be funny about it.
I know.
It's not evil intent,
But
hey.
that was hilarious. What you did. If I go find that Saturday Night skit about the Trump shoes. That was the funniest thing. Okay, so how should we prepare for potential volatility or this next election?
I think our investment philosophy is preparation as it is. In 2008, if your account went down 37% with the market, you still got your dividends coming in. Your income is still there.
And you're reinvesting and
if
buying
you're not
cheap.
taking it, you're reinvesting cheap.
I did a bunch of research and, I'm putting this together and, I was trying to be non-biased to our philosophy. And, I'm going online and it's given me all these like focus points of how to diversify and dollar cost average and all these yada, 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 investment tips. And in years past, I would have been all over this and going, okay, this is what you need to do. And we've been doing this dividend philosophy for so long now that there's no way I would ever change anything. Because if the market's going up, and everything's getting more expensive. And when I say the market, I really shouldn't say the market. I should say when your portfolio is going up, because the market isn't an indication of how you are doing.
Might not look like you at all.
Yeah. Your portfolio is good or bad. And if it's getting more expensive, unfortunately you're buying at a higher price and there's a premium and you're getting less shares when you're reinvesting. On the flip side, and if some of our predictions come true, whether yours or mine, and we see volatility in the market and things go down or don't move, like our portfolio hasn't really grown in the last year or so, and the reality is hasn't been a bad thing at all because these are strong companies with great payout ratios that have good dividends, and there's a huge percentage of our client base that's living on that dividend, and it's been super rock steady.
And the great thing is they're typically increasing year
and they
after
have
year.
been increasing. And when those prices stay the same or go down, you're buying, for those who are reinvesting,
more
on the
shares,
cheap.
more income.
And I want to say it's like a recoil effect, because when the markets are shifting to tech, they're not necessarily buying our stocks. They're putting all their other potential into tech,
into the hope,
of this growth. Yeah. And then when the markets shift and tech isn't hot. All of that wealth gets redistributed back into our boring, really good, really strong, really stable portfolio. And so when times are good in tech, we might just mud along. But when times are bad in tech, all of that wealth gets pushed into ours. Yeah. So when the markets as a whole go down, we either stay the same or start trending up because all that wealth comes over to the stable, rock solid, dependable dividend portfolios, and we reap the benefit of that. So we might miss some of that growth, but boy, does it really look good, and the reality behind the growth, the average growth, is really strong. Case in point, if you look at the NASDAQ over the last 3 years, you would go, man, a dividend portfolio couldn't keep up at all. That can't be farther from the truth. If you look at the NASDAQ going back 3 years ago to this month, and then you look at our Div 30, well, Div 30 and Div 50, 3 years ago to this month, one of them, the Div 50, has matched the performance exactly. The Div 30 has outperformed it. Wow. From a growth perspective. So you've got this rocket ship in the NASDAQ, but because it was so bad 2 years ago, it went this, and it's up. It's basically up 25% in 3 years. Yeah. Because it dropped so bad, and our portfolio is up 25% in 3 years, and we've been boring. And that's not even counting dividend growth.
That's right.
Our dividend growth on the Div 50 is up 19% in 3 years, not counting the growth, which is awesome. The Div 30 is up way more than that. Yeah. But the realities behind it is they're stable, they're consistent, and they can handle this volatility in the market. So when we're talking about how to prepare, for market volatility, for a new changing guards or the same administration going forward, I wouldn't vary at all when it comes to our market philosophy or investing.
No, and some things about tech just occur to me, kind of worry me, because you don't have huge barriers of entry. Like, I see all the cybersecurity companies out there now. All of a sudden, you're competing with each other. Which one's going to be the winner and which one's not? You got a big Exxon. It'd be tough to put a lot of money into it to try to compete with them. So.
Let's end on this. Let's talk about NVIDIA right quick. NVIDIA is a $2 trillion company.
And it's like it did that overnight almost.
It did.
Just
in 18 months, they were a $500 billion company, and now they are a $2 trillion company, which is larger than Apple, which is larger than, there's only like two.
Microsoft's not quite $2
trillion. They're one of the largest, not the largest company now. And to put that in perspective, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, they do more revenue in a quarter than NVIDIA does in a year. Over a year. NVIDIA from a size of a company, like not its market cap, from the size of the company and revenue it does, it is a pittance compared to some of these other companies that are huge. And it's based on one thing, their AI chip. And I'm not saying where AI is here to stay, it's not going anywhere. But NVIDIA's got a target on its back because every major company from Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, well, not Microsoft because they own they own ChatGPT, or they're a 49% owner. Every Tesla, every major company out there that is at or close to as big as NVIDIA is trying to create their own chip.
Absolutely.
They have entire departments created. So you have this huge company that has done some awesome things, and I would be very cautious in how long you either stay in that stock or how long you're a part of that, because there's going to be volatility ahead.
Oh yeah, and you think about it, the way it's priced oftentimes is quarter to quarter growth or year over year growth, and maybe they're growing 100 and 200%. How much longer can you grow that fast? And all of a sudden, we only grew 25% this quarter. There's no telling what the market would do.
And I'm not saying they're a bad company. I'm not saying they're get them out of your portfolio.
Be careful.
I would be very, very careful. They think they pay a 4-cent dividend or something, some super small dividend, 2 cent. It's not a dividend company. It's a very established company that'll probably be around for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a little leery at their market cap continuing to stay where it's at because the financials behind it just don't support it. It's kind of like Netflix. Netflix, way back in the day, they were one of the big companies,
Mm-hmm.
but they've never turned a profit. I'm not even sure they still have. I don't think they've ever turned a profit.
I don't know.
And yet they fell from grace. They're still there.
They did.
But they're
They've
not
come
that
back,
big.
but yeah, once you got Roku and these other streaming services,
And I think the same is going to
competition's
be the
jump.
case with NVIDIA, because that's the name of the game. Everybody's talking about NVIDIA.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with them, but I think they're a bit overvalued. And I'm not sure how long they're going to stay
how long
there.
can you go straight up?
I know. And it's
That's
an
scary.
exciting ride. I mean, everybody's been talking about them for years. I mean, it's still one of
If
the
I could have
hottest
just
companies.
bought it when it was $2 a share,
Yeah.
That's what we all wish.
And they're
we
up
could
like 9,000%, like what in the world? So summarize this. There's probably going to be some volatility. For our clients, we're just going to stay the course. We've made some changes in our portfolio. We're going to rebalance probably 2 more times this year in light of anticipation that we're looking at to stay ahead of the game, to stay on track of what we're trying to do. Ahead of the game might be a bad thing, but just to do our thing. And if you're not in dividend stocks, I'd be very, very careful of your approach, and I'd be very careful of the rationale in these types of potential volatility years, because we don't know who's going to get elected. And it matters who's going to get elected. And the market reacts to who's going to get elected, short term and long term. And we've stated our piece. We'll see what actually happens. But good discussion today. I'm glad we had this topic. Thanks for your thoughts. I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right too. So we'll see.
And I hope I'm wrong. So thanks.
Good deal.
All right, buddy.